All right, it's going.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Jim Dill. I want to welcome you to the ACF committee meeting today. And we have a couple public hearings and a couple work sessions, and we will introduce ourselves. And as we introduce ourselves, would you let Cheryl know if you are actually in the State House complex someplace, because she has to mark you down as being there. So with that, I will start with Senator Black.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Dill. Russ Black from Wilton. I represent Senate District 17, which is all of Franklin County, 4 towns in Kennebec County, Belgrade, Mount Vernon, Fayette, and Vienna.
House Chair O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Maggie O'Neill, and I represent House District 15, which is in Saco.
Representative McCray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Dave McCray. I'm up home in center of Aroostook County in my hometown of Fort Fairfield, and I represent the people of District 148. Good morning, all.
Representative Schofield.
Good morning, Senator Dill and everyone else this morning. I'm Tom Schofield. I represent House District 112. I live in and I'm currently in the town of Weld, and I represent 17 towns and townships in Franklin and Somerset counties, and where it's a cool, snowy, high peaks of Maine this morning, 13 below.
Representative Hall.
Good morning, Randy Hall from Wilton, represent District 114, 6 towns in southern Franklin County, and I am at home today where it's balmy 11 below zero this morning, but it is warming up pretty fast out, so it's not bad. Thank you.
Representative Landry.
Thank you, Senator Dill. Good morning, Scott Landry. I represent the towns of Farmington and New Sharon, District 113, where I am currently enjoying a beautiful sunny day.
Representative Osher.
Good morning. I'm Lori Osher. I represent District 123. That's the majority of Orono, the home of the University of Maine. Also, it was -13 this morning, but warming up quickly on this sunny day.
And for those of you that came in after we started, Cheryl would like to know if you are in the State House complex. So that's why everybody's kind of talking about where they are. So Representative Pluker.
Hi, I'm Bill Blucher, and I'm at home in Warren, where I represent Warren, Hope, Appleton, part of Union, and House District 95. Thanks so much.
Senator Maxman.
Hi, I'm Chloe Maxton. I represent Senate District 13, all of Lincoln County, plus Washington and Windsor, and I am not in the State House.
Representative Bernard.
Good morning, everyone. I'm nowhere near the State House where they don't have northern lights like this. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sue Bernard. I represent District 149, which is Caribou, Westmanland, and New Sweden. And everybody's talking about their temperatures. So I will thank the Caribou Weather Service that we are at a balmy 4 below, way better than so many of you across the state. And it's sunny and it's warming.
Representative Underwood.
Good morning. I'm Joseph Underwood from Presque Isle, and I currently am not in the Augusta area. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I get everybody? I think we did. And as I mentioned, I'm Jim Dill. I'm from Old Town, and I'm not in Augusta either today. And I represent Northern Penobscot County. And with that, as I say, we will go into our public hearings, and remember they're public hearings and they are being live streamed. So if you would mute yourselves until you're called upon to speak, that way we won't run into hopefully any problems. Always be respectful of people speaking. And with that, our clerk today is Cheryl McGowan, and Karen Netto is our analyst. And we'll start right out with our first public hearing, which is LD 1921. It's resolve authorizing the state to convey to the Passamaquoddy tribe the state's interest in a parcel of land in the town of Medibemps, and that is sponsored by Representative O'Neill.
Good morning, Senator Dill, honorable members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Maggie O'Neill. I represent House District 15, which is in Saco. And I thank you for the opportunity to present LD 1921, which is a resolve that would authorize the state to convey to the Passamaquoddy tribe the state's interest in a parcel of land in the town of Medibimps. So I'll keep it short. This is a governor's bill. Vice Chief Newell and Representative Newell are here today. The bill will return another small part of ancestral land to the Passamaquoddy people. We talked about a similar return of land last session. And I do want to say that I had the honor of attending the ceremony commemorating the land return last summer with many members of this committee. And also joining Representative Newell and others for the warrior canoe trip beforehand from Indian Township to Sabag. And it was a really special experience. So I'm glad the committee can be part of returning another small piece of this land to the Passamaquoddy people. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your presentation of the bill. Representative McCray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I too went to Medibimps for the first time in my life this summer. Very nice ceremony. Representative O'Neill, I thought maybe this was part of that same bill, but apparently it's a new one. Is this at the same site, contiguous land? Do you know?
So my understanding is yes, related to the same site, but I'll leave it up to Vice Chief Newell and Representative Newell to describe further.
Thank you, Representative.
And Cheryl, would you let in, please, Daryl Newell, Rena Newell, Senator Moore, and Carla Hopkins?
They're on their way.
They're on their way. It's cold today. They may be slow. All right, it looks like most people are in, and as is our precedent, if Senator Moore is here, I will call on her next.
She should be on her way.
There she is. Good morning, Senator Moore. You're muted, Senator.
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually here in Augusta, so I'm just for the record there. But thank you for the opportunity to go first. And I know that the Vice Chief and Representative Newell will have some more additional information that is really, really important as well. So good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and distinguished members of the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Joint Standing Committee. My name is Mary Ann Moore, and I proudly represent Senate District 6, which includes all of Washington County, along with Winter Harbor, Goldsboro, and Sullivan in Hancock County as well. I am here in support of the Governor's Bill LD 1921, the resolve authorizing the state to convey the Passamaquoddy tribe the state's interest in a certain parcel of land in the town of Medibimps. This resolve authorizes the state of Maine to convey to the Passamaquoddy tribe a parcel of land located on the northerly side of State Route 191 in Medibimps, which is a portion of a site known as the Eastern Surplus Company Superfund site. The site has been designated a Superfund site due to the presence of hazardous substances, materials, or waste. This parcel continues to be listed on the national priorities list and may require further monitoring with potential remedial activities. Additionally, this parcel contains important historical artifacts, is of cultural significance to the Passamaquoddy tribe, and is protected under a recorded preservation agreement. The former owner of the Superfund site, Harry J. Smith Jr., Terrell L. Lord, and Lisa Lord, together with the United States of America and the state of Maine, entered into a consent agreement, which I referenced in my presentation. The consent decree resolved the financial liability of these site owners for the cleanup of the site and included conveyance of the parcel to the state of Maine. Carla Hopkins, the director of the Division of Remediation at the Department of Environmental Protection, will be providing additional information about the site itself. You may recall last session, I sponsored a similar governor's bill, LD 1560, which had basically the same title. And the purpose of this second and final resolve is to allow DEP to transfer to the Passamaquoddy tribe the remaining 1.08 acre parcel on the northern side of State Route 191 in Meadowbanks. At the time the first resolve was drafted and brought before this committee, the town of Meadowbanks held liens on this portion of the property, which prevented it from being included. Those liens have since been removed, allowing for the remaining portion of the property to be transferred. Tribal ownership of this land is deemed to be in the best interest of the Passamaquoddy tribe and the state of Maine, because it will permit the tribe to take ownership of land possessing historical and cultural significance to the tribe. It will protect tribal artifacts located there and protect and address environmental concerns. Additionally, pursuant to the terms of this resolve, the tribe may take ownership of the land without assuming liability for historical contamination and the tribe did not cause, permitting continued access by the state of Maine and the United States of America to address remaining and future contamination of this or nearby lands. In view of all of this, I ask for your support in voting ought to pass on LD 1921. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you for your testimony this morning.
Sure.
And next we'll go to Vice Chief Darrell Newell.
Olewan, Wally Spazwell, Kulazi Gopa, Nulas Waltham, Gazeltam Leoga, Klawestwamlinia. Good morning, Senator Dill and Representative O'Neill and honorable members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. My name is Darrell Newell. I'm Lieutenant. I'm Vice Chief of the Passamaquoddy Tribe at Madocmigog Indian Township. I'm also here in the capacity as Commissioner on the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations. I'm honored to offer testimony in support of LD 1921, resolve authorizing the state to convey to the Passamaquoddy Tribe the state's interest in parcel of land in the town of Meadowbanks. The Permanent Commission is an independent entity with a mission to examine the racial disparities across Maine and to work towards improving the status and outcomes of currently and historically disadvantaged racial, indigenous, and tribal populations. The Permanent Commission is empowered by the state law to advise and consult all three branches of government. The bill returned a portion of land we call Ndulnabemk, our relatives' place, to the Passamaquoddy people. The bill also acknowledges the ongoing work that our tribe has done in collaboration with the state and federal government to clean up the toxic contamination from decades of illegal hazardous waste disposal. Ndulnabemk is an important place for our people. Through the careful process of removing contaminated soil at the site, there have been relics and evidence left behind by our ancestors from nearly 9,000 years ago. It was an important alewife run as well as a waterway connection from our coastal territories to our inland territorial areas. For more than 50 years, the U.S. military desecrated this land by disposing of their hazardous waste with more valuable equipment at salvage auctions. In the late 1990s, we began the long process of healing that damage, a process that continues to this day. We know that the Passamaquoddy people, we who have cared for Ndulnabemk for thousands of years, are in the best position to steward this land now and in the future. Our tribal government will continue work in participation with the US EPA in that effort. The continuing monitoring of the sites to determine level of contamination, if any. Our communities thrive when we ourselves can lead the efforts to protect our lands and people. Again, Willie, thank you for your time and consideration of this bill. We respectfully urge you to support LD 1921, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill, and thank you for being here today, Chief. I'm assuming that from what you've testified that you want this piece of property, the tribe wants it. And I also am assuming that you're content that any future mitigation will continue at no cost to you folks. I mean, that the federal government will continue to mitigate when necessary anything that's left there on the site that needs not be. Could you answer that for us, please?
Yes, sir. That's my understanding, is that the state and the tribe would not be responsible for any mitigation. And the tribe has agreed with the EPA, federal government, to monitor the site and to identify if there continues to be contamination or otherwise.
Thank you. That's a concern that I have, that you will not be responsible for any of that. Thank you.
Representative Underwood.
Good morning. Chief Newell, one question that I had was the hazardous waste. What types of hazardous waste are currently that you are aware of, please?
I'm sorry, I'm not aware. I've not been involved directly with the site and the ongoing work to clean it up. I'm sure others would have that information. I'm sorry.
Representative Underwood. Yep, just a second. I think when we get to Carla Hopkins, she'll probably have that answer for us. So.
Okay, then we'll wait. Thank you.
Yep. No, you can follow up if you have a question for the chief.
Well, I was just curious as to what type of military waste is there, and whether it's nuclear or non-nuclear, whether it's PFAS or some other type of waste.
Yeah.
Basically, that's the question. Thank you.
I think that we'll wait for Carla to answer that one. Thank you, Representative. Representative McCray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Vice Chief Newell. I asked a question earlier, but I think you might be the perfect person to ask. I assume that this parcel is contiguous to the parcel that was conveyed this past summer to the tribe in that celebration. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. I had the honor of attending the ceremony last summer as well. It was a wonderful experience, and my understanding is it's across the highway or the road that's there, 191. But again, I'm not clear on the specifics of the site, but it's part of the acreage that we received last summer.
Thank you, sir.
Are there other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you for your testimony this morning. Next is Representative Newell. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and other distinguished members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Diliwis Rena Newell. My name is Rena Newell. Beskamuk Adnil. I am Passamaquoddy. I serve as a tribal representative for the Passamaquoddy tribe, and I live here in Sabayak. Thank you for the opportunity once again to present this testimony today in support for this committee's consideration of LD 1921, a resolve authorizing the state to convey to the Passamaquoddy tribe the state's interest in a certain parcel of land in the town of Meadowbanks. Again, with the understanding as stated in the summary of this bill, this resolve authorizes the state to convey to the Passamaquoddy tribe a 1.08 acre parcel of land located on the northern side of State Route 191 in Meadowbanks, located in Washington County, which is a portion of a site known as the Eastern Surplus Company Superfund site that has been designated a Superfund site due to the presence of hazardous substances, materials, or waste, as previously mentioned. This resolve allows the Passamaquoddy tribe to take ownership of the land without the assumption of liability for the historical contamination that the tribe did not cause, and permits continued access to the land by the state and the United States to address remaining and future contamination at this or nearby lands. In the spring of 2021, this committee received similar testimony in support of LD 1560, again authorizing the state to convey to the Passamaquoddy tribe their interest in a 3.2 acre parcel of land in the town of Meadowbanks. Upon the anticipated passage of LD 1560, as many of you would recall, in August of 2021, many of you and others joined us at I can't even pronounce it today, Ndilnabemk, our relative's place. It was a wonderful celebration of meaningful collaboration between the state and the Passamaquoddy tribe. I've included a link to an article written following the celebration in my written testimony. Again, I thank you for taking the time to travel and join us, Willie One. We are once again appreciative and thankful to the chief executive in putting forth this resolve today for this committee's consideration. In closing, I humbly ask for your support in the passage of this resolve. At this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions that members of the committee may have. Willie One, and I say good morning, Willie Spuzwill, to my Vice Chief, Daryl Newell. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill, and good morning, Representative Newell. Nice to see you this morning, and I'm just curious, are the black flies as bad down there as they were the last time you testified on that regard?
I appreciate that question, Representative. I had once again thought about venturing over to Meadowbanks to give a visual of this particular parcel. However, due to the temperature and the amount of snow we just got recently, I decided it was in my best interest, and perhaps all of you, that I maybe ended up in a different Zoom room altogether. So thank you for the question.
I think that was a wise decision. Thank you.
Senator Moore.
I'll just add a comment. I actually drove by there yesterday morning and I agree with Representative Newell. It's not passable. You really would be sinking down way over your knees to try to even take a look at the parcel itself.
Are there other questions for Representative Newell? Yes, Representative Bernard.
Thank you very much, Senator. Representative Newell, it's nice to talk to you this morning, and it's nice to see you with the background of the beautiful sunshine coming up. I think that's a sunrise. Mine is not, but we're still in the same, under the same earth here. So I just have a quick question, forgive my ignorance. If this particular parcel is turned over, are there specific plans for it? Or just to leave it as is for recreation, or what is it that we will see happening to the land after this transfer?
Thank you for that question, Representative Bernard. I appreciate your background as well. I understand there's been some sightings of the Northern Lights up that way. Thank you. The picture that I have as my background is of Munkatauden, if I could move. That's a picture of the mountain. I appreciate that question. It's my understanding that this does abut the previous allocation of the parcel of land. And at the last opportunity to testify, it was my understanding that the Brownfield coordinator, Dale Mitchell, who's unavailable today to provide any testimony, was maintaining the parcel. So I think at this time, I don't believe there's any expectation for anything in particular other than to, once again, if there's any remediation that needs to take place, and that will happen. And I would just suspect that it would be utilized in the same manner that we witnessed last August as a cultural place and a place to gather.
Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank
Next, we
you.
have Carla Hopkins from Department of Environmental Protection.
Good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and members of the committee. I am Carla Hopkins, the relatively new Director of the Division of Remediation at the Department of Environmental Protection, speaking in support today of LD 1921. This is the second of two resolves authorizing the state to transfer land it owns to the Passamaquoddy tribe. On June 8, 2021, the governor approved the first resolve, LD 1560, a resolve authorizing the state to convey to the Passamaquoddy tribe the state's interest in a certain parcel of land in the town of Meddybemps. That resolve authorized the conveyance to the Passamaquoddy tribe of approximately 3.2 acres of land located on the northern side of State Route 191 in Meddybemps, Washington County, which is, as we've talked about earlier today, a portion of a site known as the Eastern Surplus Company Superfund site, which has been designated as a Superfund site due to the presence of hazardous substances, materials, or waste. The purpose of this second and final resolve is to allow DEP to transfer to the Passamaquoddy tribe that remaining 1.08 acre parcel on the northern side of State Route 191 in Meddybemps. At the time the first resolve was drafted, as Senator Moore mentioned, and when it was brought before this committee, the town of Meddybemps held liens on this portion of the property, which prevented it from being included at that time. Those liens have since been removed, allowing for this remaining portion of the property to be transferred. For historical context, in 2002, the parcel was conveyed to the DEP to resolve the owner's liability and to facilitate the site cleanup. Attached to this testimony is a deed restriction with a site map on the second to last page showing the Smith parcel, the one we're talking about today, which is now proposed for transfer. The Passamaquoddy tribe wants the parcel, as you've heard from Chief Newell and Representative Newell. So despite its listing as a Superfund site, the tribe does want the property because of its cultural significance to the tribe. The northern half of the parcel is part of an area known by the tribe as Nolnabemk, which translates into our relative's place. I hope I did okay on that pronunciation. I've been working on it for about a week, so I hope I did all right. The Passamaquoddy tribe wants this parcel. Nolnabemk is situated at the outlet to Meddybemps Lake, which is the beginning of the Class AA Benny's River. The Abbey Museum describes Nolnabemk as centrally located within the ancestral Passamaquoddy territory in eastern Maine and southwestern New Brunswick. This location affords easy travel by canoe to the ocean, the St. Croix River, the lakes and waterways of interior Maine and New Brunswick, and to the abundant and varied resources these settings provide. This area has been a central meeting place for Native Americans for at least 8,600 years. In 1946, the parcel was purchased and operated as a military surplus store, salvage yard, and hydropower facility. Numerous containers of chlorinated solvents and PCBs were improperly stored and spilled at the site during these operations. In 1985, DEP designated the site as an uncontrolled hazardous substance site and began an emergency removal operation that DEP and the U.S. Department of Defense completed in 1990. The site was added to the National Priority List of Superfund sites in 1996, and by 1999, contaminated soil had been removed from the site, followed by installation of a groundwater treatment system in 2000. That groundwater treatment is ongoing. Excuse me. The site was known to contain historical artifacts, complicating removal and disposal of contaminated soil. DEP and EPA worked closely with the tribe on these issues. The site is listed as a Maine Historic Preservation Commission's archaeological site, a portion of which was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2001 to mitigate impacts to the site artifacts necessitated by cleanup activities response action included an archaeological dig at the site, reports, construction of a walkway with kiosks to explain the site's history, and deed restrictions. Approximately 1/3 of the Nulnabemp area where artifacts were found and embedded artifacts remain is on the Smith parcel, the one in question today. Among other things, the deed restriction requires that the property shall be maintained in a manner that preserves its historical integrity, in particular, the setting or the physical environment and the feeling, the sense of tribal spiritual life. The tribe, DEP, and EPA have reached a mutually agreeable and advantageous conceptual approach to the transfer that provides the environmental agencies access to continue groundwater cleanup of the parcel and any other needed response actions, provides the tribe with access for education and ceremonies, ensures security of artifacts and site maintenance, such as snow plowing and lawn mowing by the tribe, uses the Voluntary Response Action Program, or VRAP, to address state environmental liability and a comfort letter to address federal environmental liability stemming from historic releases, and has the tribe, rather than DEP, defining what constitutes preservation of historical integrity, in particular the setting, the physical environment, and the feeling, the sense of tribal spiritual life. In conclusion, we believe that this transfer is mutually beneficial for both the state and the tribe. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony here this morning. I am available to answer questions of the committee, both now and at work session.
Thank you. Representative Underwood, did that answer your question as to what hazardous materials are on site?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Are there other questions? All right, seeing none, does anybody have any objections if we go right into work session on this today? Looks like most people are saying, yes, let's do it. Can I have a motion to suspend the rules and to go right into work session? Representative Landry made that, seconded by Representative Osher. All right, I'm just going to do a show of hands. All in favor? Is there anybody opposed? I don't see any opposed. All right, we are into work session on LD 1921. Karen, is there anything you'd like to instruct us on here?
Not really. I did take out the bill file for LD 1560, which was the similar resolve with the other parcel that was transferred to the Passamaquoddy tribe. And I was just curious if there was a fiscal note, and there was not on that one. So at the risk of saying something I shouldn't, I would presume that there will not be a fiscal note on this similar resolve.
Okay, great. Are there any questions for Karen? I will entertain a motion. Representative Landry, I see your hand up.
I would move that we move forward with the transfer of this property on LD 1921 to the Passamaquoddy tribe.
So it's ought to pass on LD 1921, is that correct?
Yes.
Is there a
Seconded.
second? It's seconded by Representative Underwood. All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, Cheryl, would you please call the roll?
Yes, ought to pass on LD 1921. Senator James Dill.
Yes.
Senator James Dill, yes. Senator Russell Black.
Yes.
Senator Russell Black, yes. Senator Chloe Maxman.
Yes.
Senator Chloe Maxman, yes. Representative Margaret O'Neill.
Yes.
Representative Margaret O'Neill, yes. Representative Randall Hall.
Yes.
Representative Randall Hall, yes. Representative Thomas Schofield.
Yes.
Representative Thomas Schofield, yes. Representative Lori Osher.
Yes.
Representative Lori Osher, yes. Representative Joseph Underwood.
Yes.
Representative Joseph Underwood, yes. Representative Scott Landry.
Yes.
Representative Scott Landry, yes. Representative Bill Pluker.
Yes.
Representative Bill Pluker, yes. Representative Jeffrey Gifford, absent. Representative David McCray. absent. Representative Susan Bernard.
Yes.
Representative Susan Bernard, yes. 11 yes, 2 absent.
Okay, on ought to pass on LD 1921, it's 11 in favor and none against with 2 absent. It passes. And I will close the work session on LD 1921. I will now open the public hearing on LD 1929, an act to provide assistance to area severely infested with brown-tail moth. And would you please let in Representative Hepler, Allison Canody, and Betsy Miller, please. Those are our first 3, and I would remind everybody that I do have my timer, and we will be doing a 3-minute clock on everybody eventually.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can. See, it's just like IF&W now.
I know. I
I
was
think
going
you
to
got
say
half the committee here, so.
all of my colleagues on IF&W. So good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I'm Representative Allison Hepler. I live in Woolwich, and I represent the towns of Aroustic, Georgetown, Phippsburg, Woolwich, Dresden, and a small part of Richmond, and I'm pleased to present LD 1929, an act to provide assistance to areas severely infested with brown-tail moths. So the story of this bill began in the Bath, Maine YMCA several years ago. I mentioned to a friend of mine that I knew someone who'd gotten a rash, and she said it was from something called brown-tail moth. The next thing I knew, others were sharing their unpleasant experiences, having similar rashes lasting weeks, and the home remedies they'd found to take the edge off. Brown-tail moth, as you know, is an invasive pest that has created both a serious human health and forest health problem. The toxic hairs of BTM caterpillars cause skin rashes and can also lead to serious respiratory distress. These caterpillars are voracious defoliators of many of our hardwood trees. The Maine Forest Service has mapped about 198,000 acres of defoliation this year due to pests. Last year showed around 154. So here, 154,000 acres. So here I am 3 years later before your committee presenting a bill that would help to address this problem in 2 ways. First, this bill would provide funding for a municipality or a nonprofit entity such as a land trust to produce BTM in their communities. Currently, there's no state funding to help municipalities. And as a selectman, I know that one size doesn't fit all. And what one town is going to need differs from the next. The city of Bath, for instance, next to where I live, has a forestry committee and an arborist, and they've produced videos on how to combat the pest, which has been really useful, I will say. The city of Waterville has budgeted $100,000 to address BTM through the use of insecticide treatments of trees and spraying. On a smaller scale, Blue Hills Local Library purchased pruning pole saws that lends out to residents so they can clip nests on their personal property. Towns like the one I represent have no resources to do this kind of work, and I know we're not the only communities in this position. This bill would make available a variety of methods that are easily accessible and fairly simple to implement. Some examples include the purchase or rental of pole saws, so residents can clip nests out of their trees. Maybe the rental of a cherry picker in a neighborhood so that nests that are higher up in the trees can be clipped. Maybe hiring a licensed pesticide applicator to target specific trees. Maybe hiring an arborist to conduct workshops or educational opportunities. Basically, it would allow communities to determine for themselves which methods would work best for them. Second, as we know, BTM damage isn't limited to humans. It also affects the health of our trees. Forests play a critical role in capturing carbon in the atmosphere and has been identified as a key element in Maine's climate action plan. The continued defoliation caused by these pests puts this at risk. I will say a key focus for the governor's carbon task force is forest resiliency through the management of invasive pests. So the second part of this bill provides for additional staffing for the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, not only to help administer this municipal program, but also to address and monitor other invasive pests, which may well pose a bigger risk to our forests than anything else. The governor's office has also issued a resolution designated February as Brown-tailed moth Awareness Month and is coordinating local outreach and education. So happy Brown-tailed moth Awareness Month. In sum, this is a growing problem that's not going to go away. I'm not an alarmist, but the consequences of tree damage across the state affect the forest's ability to sequester carbon, and the impact of pests like brown-tailed moth on people stress our healthcare system. Others who have expertise in these fields can each speak about specific forestry practices and the need to keep BTM out of our trees. I decided to submit this bill after reviewing previous efforts to address BTM, the testimony that was submitted both for and against, and after speaking with a number of people in the field in order to extract what I hope are the best ideas from all the previous work that your committee has done on this issue. I think this problem can be effectively tackled locally and also at the state level, as this bill aims to do. Thanks for the work you're doing on this, and I'm happy to answer questions as I can.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Representative Hepler? Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Hepler, for bringing this bill forward. I wondered if you could share, just off the cuff, some of what your community is doing, what this problem looks like for managing, and how the community is handling it, and how this would really help.
Yeah.
Did I freeze?
Thank you. Oh, thank you for the question. It is, in addition to the experience I had at the Y Locker Room, I've gone out to communities, neighborhoods where the trees have been defoliated. They're wondering whether they should cut their trees down. I've had people worry about property values being diminished as a result of this. I have had people wonder about tourism. I think my sister-in-law actually is going to be testifying about that. You know, as a tourist, you know, are people going to stop coming? I have also talked to somebody who, if she wasn't already married to someone in Aroustic, she's not sure she would stay. So is that what you're looking for?
I was looking for a bit of just, you know, what it means for local communities across the state to manage this. And I don't know how much you touched on it in your testimony, but I know in years prior, something we've heard is that it's just hard for folks to manage this.
Well,
you know, municipality by municipality.
Part of the problem is that many of these nests are high up on trees. So I'm not gonna suggest that my neighbor kids go up and try to clip them out. I think resources are the biggest problem, and like I said, the city of Bath is willing to work with us and maybe come out and do an outreach program to show it, maybe a how-to on how to clip nests. I will say that somebody I know in Bath has rented a cherry picker and has actually used a shotgun to shoot out the ones that are higher in his trees. Not something I necessarily recommend. The other thing that I just heard last week, and Allison Canody, who was on Main Calling last week, could address this, is there's a entrepreneurial guy who wants to use drones to try to clip out the ones on the top of the trees.
Thank you.
Representative Underwood. You're muted, Representative.
Hi, good morning. To the Representative Helper, this question basically, would you be comfortable with this committee adding an amendment onto this bill? And that amendment basically would say it excludes nonprofits for use of the cities and towns, municipalities, unorganized territories, etc., and to use by these entities only.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? To exclude?
Sure. I'd like to exclude every other use other than for use by cities and towns, municipalities in their effort to eradicate the brown-tailed moth, or let them determine, and even drones, that's a good idea too. But let the municipalities or the cities that have a legitimate brown-tailed moth problem, just to have these people determine how the funds are to be used, and no other uses, for example, like nonprofits or whatever. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you for that question. I included that because what I've been told by the department is that sometimes land trusts have been able to do some work on their own properties, but I don't have any personal experience with that. So I think the committee knows best how to operate on this.
Thank you very much.
Are there other questions for Representative Hepler? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next is Allison Canody from the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Allison Canody, and I am the state entomologist and the Director of Forest Health and Monitoring of the Maine Forest Service in the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I am speaking on behalf of the department in favor of LD 1929, an act to provide assistance to areas severely infested with brown-tail moths. We thank Representative Hepler for sponsoring this bill. I find it fitting that today, the first day of Brown-tail Moth Awareness Month, I'm providing this testimony. Brown-tail moth is advancing in Maine, and locations throughout Maine that have suitable trees can harbor it. While we do not have the power to stop the brown-tail moth outbreak, the people in the towns of Maine can reduce the spread of brown-tail moth and its impacts on quality of life. Towns, municipalities are in the front line of the battle against brown-tail moth infestation, and LD 1929 would give the department an essential tool by channeling funding to hard-hit towns for their brown-tail response efforts. The brown-tail moth continues to increase, the core areas affected are shifting, and the overall trajectory of the outbreak continues to rise. We need only to look to the efforts of the city of Waterville, which has dedicated $100,000 this year to brown-tail response, to understand that $150,000 would be a small step towards supporting communities. However, we do believe that it can make a difference in the number of communities that are able to respond. Our tools to fight brown-tail moth infestation thus far have been limited to communication, education, and technical assistance. The department and our partners have used the press, newsletters, social media, and other correspondence to alert people about brown-tail moth detections and encourage mitigation measures. LD 1929 will allow us to add financial support for brown-tail mitigation to the technical assistance and moral support already provided. In addition, this bill would add staff to the Maine Forest Service to respond to this and other growing threats to Maine's forest health. If we look back over the last 20 years, the insect and disease management staff has shrunk and the threats to forest health have increased. In the testimony, you'll see the short list of emerging growing problems in Maine's forests. I'm not going to read them all, but they include familiar species such as Asian longhorn beetle, hemlock woolly adelgid, and spruce budworm, and other more significant problems. With the increased demands, adequate survey, response, and technical support to maintain forest health are not possible with existing staff. In addition, modernization, innovation, analysis, and maintenance of existing functions all suffer. All this is happening against a backdrop of a lack of normal climate. It is also at a time when forests growing at their current or better rates are being recognized not only as critical to Maine's economy and way of life, but also as crucial as a natural climate solution for the ability to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it in their wood. The two parts of this bill are similar in that they recognize significant needs and provide small positive steps towards addressing real problems. I urge you to support these steps towards improvement. Attached to the testimony, I provided background material on the brown-tail moth in Maine, including information on the legislative proclamation and department communication strategy. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions now or at the work session.
Representative Underwood.
Hi, thank you for your testimony. I hadn't planned on asking a question, but are you saying the department needs added personnel to administer this program if approved by this committee?
I've added personnel to administer this program would certainly be helpful, yes.
And basically the idea was, I think the municipalities and the cities and towns of the state should be the ones to understand, should be able to use the funds, any funds provided by this, with the advice and consent only of the department. And that's the way I see it. Is apparently that's not the way that you're describing. Is that correct?
So what we have seen in successful responses to mitigation of brown-tail moth is that there's a number of different types of partners who are engaging in that. And so we look to communities like Deer Isle, where a land trust has actually led the community effort to response to brown-tail moth. A community like Hallowell, where it's the Conservation Committee that's really been instrumental in leading a response to brown-tail moth. So we do see that there are a variety of partners that can be the important ones in engaging in addressing this problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Pluker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Canody, I was just wondering, did the department ask for any resources to help with brown-tail moth in the supplemental budget?
In the supplemental budget, there are requests for resources to help us fulfill our mission, including providing technical advice and assistance on brown-tail moth.
But no increased positions?
Including positions.
I'm sorry. Did you ask for additional positions in the supplemental budget in order to address brown-tail moth issues?
Yes, brown-tail moth, among other issues.
Okay. And what positions did you, so the positions in this bill would be in addition to the ones you've already requested within the supplemental budget?
No.
Okay. Could you, I think I'm misunderstanding you. You've asked for additional positions within the supplemental budget, and then we're also adding positions here in this bill. Is that true?
Yes, both the supplemental budget and the request from our department in the supplemental budget and this bill would add positions. But if this bill were passed with positions, it would affect the request for the supplemental budget. Is that clear?
I've got you.
Okay.
So did you essentially ask for these same positions within the budget?
Similar, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Do you know the details as to how they are different?
The department request was for an entomologist 2.
Okay. And this is an entomologist 1.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill. Thank you for being here. I'm just wondering, is this enough? Is this going to be just, is this going to be substantive enough to make an impact, to make a viable impact? I've seen sometimes in the past, and don't get me wrong, where the state government has taken a Band-Aid approach in order to sort of a feel-good approach in order to say we're working on the problem, but the problem never really goes away, or the problem never gets a substantive reduction. Do you feel that this will provide a substantive reduction in the brown-tail moth if this goes through? Thank you.
My feeling is that what it will provide is an opportunity for more people to engage. I don't believe that it is going to provide a overall substantive reduction in the brown-tailed moth population. But I think that it could make a difference for some towns and other organizations in being able to make that decision to engage. My personal experience with trying to get communities engaged is that communities are overwhelmed with other responsibilities, and brown-tailed moth tends to be way at the bottom of the list until it is a huge problem.
The follow-up, Senator?
Certainly.
Well, it seems to me that that's the crux of the problem that I just sort of outlined, is that we're going to have another committee. We're going to get people talk about it. We're going to have input. We're going to think about these sorts of things. And it seems to me that with all the well and good intentions, that this may not be, I hate to use the term silver bullet, but this may not be the missile that really is effective in moving us forward. And do you see a way to improve this so that it is more than just what I'm referring to? I'm reluctant to think that this, while I applaud the effort, I'm just not sure it's good enough. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
I can, if it's okay, I can get back to you on that in the work session, if that is acceptable.
That would be great. I'd appreciate it. I think we need to do this brown-tailed moth, all these invasive critters that are coming into our state. We thrive on the forest products industry. We thrive as a recreational state, the outdoor recreational business. And we need to be very proactive in mitigating these things as quickly and as efficiently as possible. That's my view. And I think that if you could help figure that out, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Something I'd like to request for the work session is if we could just have a little bit of an overview of what individual municipalities are dealing with and what they're doing, the kind of costs that they're taking on, and how much of the problem they're able to address. I think I saw Rebecca Graham on the list, so maybe she can answer that or provide it at the work session, but it sounds like you have some insight into that too. So I'd just like a little bit of perspective on that for the work session, please.
All right.
Are there other questions? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next is Betsy Miller, followed by Carla Black, Patrick Strout, and Rebecca Graham. So if you'd let those three in, please, Cheryl. I will turn to Betsy Miller, who is on the phone, I believe. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to testify. I'm a tourist in Maine. I've been going there for 40 years. I'm also a property owner in Maine, and I really love being in Maine. But this past spring, when I was up there, I was exposed for the first time to the brown-tailed moth, and I had a really horrible reaction. And by the third day, I had to go to the emergency clinic in order to get prednisone. And before that, the only thing that was giving me any kind of relief was by icing down, and it started to spread all over my body. It started on my chest and went all throughout my body. And then the prednisone took another day or two to really kick it back. All I wanted to say is that if that had been my first experience of Maine, I'm pretty sure I would have never come back. But clearly, since I have a long-term experience with Maine, I really love being there. But I probably won't come back at that time of the year if I can avoid it, because it was such a horrible experience. And I know that you're getting a lot more of the technical stuff from everyone else and that sort of thing, but I just wanted to give my perspective as somebody that both loves Maine and also acts as a tourist when I come there. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, thank you for your testimony. Next.
Thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you. Next is Carla Black.
Good morning, everyone. Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and distinguished members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Carla Black. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Maine Woodland Owners, speaking today in favor of LD 1929. Browntail, as you've heard, has been established in Maine since 1904 and has been in an outbreak phase since 2015. According to the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, the browntail can be found throughout Maine, with the greatest concentrations in mid-coastal Maine and the capital region. Judging by the pharmacy shelves last summer, I'm guessing that there's likely not many of us attending the hearing today that hasn't been impacted by browntail moths in recent years. Small woodland owners, like most Mainers, have also struggled to control infestations of browntail moths. Not just a threat to our public health, browntail moths are having devastating effects on our forests and lands. While forest fires often get a lot of attention, we consider the greatest threat to the forest comes from insects and diseases, especially those invasive pests that have no known natural enemies. Using aerial surveys, the Department of Agriculture has mapped nearly 200,000 acres of damage caused by browntail moths in Maine. Caterpillars feed on the leaves of many hardwood trees and shrubs. Feeding by browntail can cause reduced growth and mortality. This bill will create, as you've heard, a program at the Department of Agriculture that will assist government entities and nonprofits by providing resources, which may include for the mechanical, cultural, or chemical control of browntail moths, education campaigns, and other activities to mitigate browntail moth populations. It also includes funding for 2 entomology-related positions in the department to support the management of forest insect pests. The department has historically been understaffed in this area and could use these additional resources. Increased staffing will help not only with the browntail moth infestation we are currently experiencing, but it will help also help with other critical infestations happening throughout the state, including emerald ash borer and spruce budworm, to name but a few. These infestations are all having a significant impact on the health of our forests. As we work our way towards spring and the beginning of another browntail moth season, this bill provides a ray of hope. Dedicating more resources to control browntail, and by extension, many other invasive species, is a welcome step to combat forest insect pests. For these reasons, Maine Woodland Owners supports LD 1929 and urges the committee's favorable consideration. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Whoops, I'm sorry, hold it. Representative Underwood.
One question for Mrs. Black. How should this committee handle this bill? In other words, should the state be allowed to hire a couple entomologists and associated personnel that goes with it in order to fund it? Or should the cities and towns, municipalities, etc., should they be allowed to receive a grant from the department and ask them what their plan is, for example, how they're going to use it, but not have any authority to use it for any specific thing other than for what the municipalities have? And because that's the avenue that I would be interested in pursuing. What is your opinion, please? Thank you.
I think we do think that the department has been understaffed in this area. So this certainly, as you've heard from the agency itself, they've been looking for additional positions within the department. I think there could be the potential that nonprofits and other organizations like land trusts that have been mentioned could have a role to play, but certainly would defer to this committee in terms of how you proceed.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you for your testimony this morning.
Thank you very much.
Next is Patrick Strout. Good morning.
Thank you, Senator Dill and Representative O'Neill and distinguished members of the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee. My name is Patrick Strauch. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Forest Products Council, and the council appreciates Representative Hepler's introduction of LD 1929, and we think it's a good approach to a growing issue of invasive forest insects pests. I planted white oak on my property next to red oak and was surprised because there aren't really any white oaks in the area, but it was infested this past summer by the brown-tailed moth. So they're an interesting insect, and they're showing up in many different places. MFPC has a we have wood-consuming mills and landowners located throughout Maine, so we have a vested interest in the health of all of Maine's forest. The community support component of this bill is very important, and we think Representative Hepler is insightful in thinking that not all communities will have the same needs and approaches in addressing the issue of brown-tailed moth control. This community conservation approach is a model we could use more extensively in Maine. In New Brunswick, there is a spruce budworm citizen conservation program that educates residents on the challenges of insect infestation and seeks their involvement in monitoring populations levels. And I know Allison, as a state entomologist, can, with more people, can begin to build these kinds of programs and this kind of interest by the public, which I think is really important. We support increasing the staffing of the entomologists in the department. This expertise is critically important in educating the public and assisting in monitoring and designing integrated pest management plans. And the trend is accurate. The increase in threat with the decrease in staffing is something we need to reverse. The pending spruce budworm outbreak is another example of the challenges managing the insect infestations we have. Hundreds of millions of dollars, as well as hundreds of millions of acres of spruce fir were defoliated. And we need to plan and be prepared for all these kinds of infestations. I'd recommend taking a look at the coming spruce budworm outbreak publication by the University of Maine. It's a risk assessment of Maine's forest community and an approach that we could build upon as well for other species. So we support this bill as a proactive step towards addressing the growing threat of invasive insect species and creating more resilient forests that can provide the numerous benefits that come from being involved in a forest economy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Something that caught my ear was the spruce budworm citizen conservation program you were talking about with in New Brunswick. Could you explain a little more about how that program works and how that, like what kinds of things are you envisioning that will help people with this?
Well, it's just an interesting, I bring it up because it was it's a citizen conservation approach. I think they had a web design. I'll get you some more information on it so you can take a look at it. But it was taking a rather large problem of spruce budworm, and it accomplished several things. It got the community involved in the problem instead of not being informed and seeing operations that were controlling the infestation without really having ownership in it or understanding it. And so I thought it was just a creative approach. It's a trend in conservation to have community scientists involved in issues. So I'll be glad to get some more information on it so that you can take a look at it. It might be real helpful in looking at how we approach these kind of issues in Maine.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next is Rebecca Graham. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Dill and Representative O'Neill and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Rebecca Graham, and I'm presenting testimony in support of LD 1929 on behalf of Maine Municipal Association and at the direction of our 70-member Legislative Policy Committee. Municipal officials in coastal areas have been battling this with the assistance of nonprofit and conservation and community scientists for several years now, and they have some acquired experience of what's effective and what's ineffective in some areas based specifically on geography, sometimes prevailing winds. Representative McCrate could talk to you about that in terms of what they've dealt with in Harpswell, with removing it from one area only to have it blow back in based upon how the summer winds blow into other areas, because this material sticks around for a long period of time, even after the animals have left, or the bugs rather have left. However, municipal officials don't have a stack of entomologists on hand, and they don't have town departments of science, and they all have differing levels of capacity and even hours in which they are available. What they do have is that local knowledge piece and the well-established partnership with our state partners to tackle these statewide threats. And the coastal plague has moved deeply inland, and it's going to have another whole layer of complexity built into that. The only thing that municipalities currently have is the ability to apply for a public health nuisance declaration from the CDC, which allows them to do extra budgetary expenditure beyond what they've already budgeted to try to tackle this in retrospect in the moment. And that allows them to conduct aerial sprays or target moth infestations. But again, that's really based upon local capacity to shoulder that. And it doesn't provide them any additional funds or any sort of technical support to the municipality. It only gives them that extra budgetary authority. So while the ability to expend funds is helpful when trying to combat something that's highly localized, we know that public health threats don't adhere to municipal boundaries and or respect local budget capacity either. So as the brown-tailed moth infestation has moved, it's now clearly an issue of statewide public health significance. And we believe that a statewide approach that leverages that local knowledge and those established nonprofit relationships will lead to better outcomes. There will also be a cost-effective solution over that current siloed approach. So we applaud Representative Hepler for introducing this and the department's willingness and recognizing this threat and the need for more assistance within those departments that we traditionally look to from the municipal level for that support. And I'll be happy to bring additional information regarding any of those costs, although they are going to be very different based upon municipalities at the work session as well.
Thank you. Questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much. Cheryl, that's all I have on my list. Is there anyone else to testify on 1929? Nope.
There is not.
All right, thank you. Then I will close the public hearing on LD 1929, an act to provide assistance to areas severely infested with brown-tailed moths. And we'll go right into our first work session, which is LD 219, an act to enhance the agricultural marketing loan fund by establishing a variable interest rate for loans and to allow participants in the main funds for the future program to borrow at that rate.
Longest title ever.
I think so.
So this is a carryover bill. The committee voted to carry it over last April. We did hear from the Director of the Bureau of Agriculture, Food and Rural Resources, Nancy McBrady, that the original purpose of 219 was to update the interest rate of the Agricultural Marketing Loan Fund, AMLF, to be more competitive. So they asked for more time to due diligence and really take a look at the AMLF and also the corresponding agricultural development grant program, which is funded by the interest of AMLF's revolving loan fund. And Representative Pluker, who is the sponsor of 219, has been working with the department on an amendment to 219, and that has all been sent to you, and it's also now posted on the web under the electronic file for 219. So we did hear testimony only in support of the bill, and I think all of the testimony related to the amended version of 219. So we heard from Director McBrady that the problem that they're seeing is there's been a noticeable decline in the use of AMLF over the last 10 years. And so the interest earned is not keeping up with the demand for agricultural development grants. So what this has led to is a more sporadic funding of ADG grants. And so they feel like if changes aren't made, that sporadic funding of ADG grants will continue. And what they were hoping to do with the amendment is to sort of stabilize funding for ADG, and by having it no longer rely on AMLF. So, and they also, there's quite a bit of updates to the interest rates of AMLF, and they see that as very important because they feel like AMLF will continue to languish at its current non-competitive interest rates. So Director McBrady in her testimony went through what the proposed amendment does, but just to refresh your memories, one of the primary things that the amendment does is it sort of separates the agricultural development grant program from AMLF. And then in section 1 on page 1 of the amendment, one of the things that it does is it provides dedicated funding to support the ADG program. It's in section 1 of the amendment, which is Title 7, section 306A, subsection 1, and it provides that $550,000 will be transferred from the general fund to the agricultural development fund annually. I think just based on what I heard, this number is up for debate, but that's how the amendment is drafted right now. And sort of another significant piece is at the top of page 2 of the amendment. It makes the rules governing ADG routine technical rather than major substantive. So then I'm sort of going to skip around here, but as I mentioned earlier, it makes several changes to the interest rates under the Agricultural Marketing Loan Fund. So if you go to section 7 of the amendment on page 5, well, let me back up. It adjusts the scope of eligible expense categories under the AMLF. And then it on page 3, 4, under section 5 of the amendment, this is where the changes in the interest rates occur. So the first change in section 5 on page 3, it increases the percent coverage provided for loans over 200,000 from 75% in current law to 90%. So obviously there would be a corresponding decrease in the burden for borrowers from 25% to 10%. And then again in section 5 on page 4, on that subsection relating to subsection 3 relating to interest rate, it reduces the interest rate of loans from 5%, which is current law, to the federal prime rate on the date of loan commitment, but not greater than 5%. So this is the same as this committee approved last year for the Potato Marketing Loan Fund. And it also allows existing loan holders to refinance at that new rate. And then finally, in the next subsection on page 4, subsection 3A, loans for participants in Maine Farms for the Future program, it adjusts the interest rate to be the federal prime rate on the date of loan commitment, but not greater than 2%. And I guess I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Questions for Karen? Representative Pluker.
Sorry, it was faster to raise my hand. Karen, could you just explain the difference between the 2% and the 5% interest rate on the or maybe that might be a question for Director McBrady.
Yeah, I'll defer to her. It's sort of current law, but I'll defer to her.
Okay, thank you.
Director McBrady, welcome.
Good afternoon, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, members of the committee. Thank you for having me today to talk about this bill. And Representative Pluker, yes, there are two different interest rates that are put forward based on historical precedent. A borrower who is not engaged in the Farms for the Future program would have the interest rate at not more than 5%. And the one who is within the Farms for the Future program would have not more than 2%.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Could you just comment briefly on the $550,000 general fund appropriation versus the $550,000 general fund appropriation, and which you might prefer?
Well, we were, to be perfectly honest, swinging big. We would love to be able to have a very robust program here, simply because we know that on average, we're seeing well over $1 million in requests for the Ag Development Grant on an annual basis. So $750,000 seemed like a great way to split the difference. We also recognize that that is a very large amount coming out of the general fund on a dedicated process, and want to be realistic given all of the competing demands set forth in front of our state these days, and know that anything that is robust and above the existing $250,000 would be a welcome change. So, you know, we also want to be realistic and have a chance of surviving the appropriations process as well. And I know you all are very primed for that and understand that. So we're open for consideration as to what you feel is a comfortable amount, provided it's above the $250,000 that we currently utilize and feel is underwhelming based on the need.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So if I were to do what you wanted to do, then would I do 750 or 550? I'm open to either.
I'm not a gambler, Representative Pluker. So I want, right, but I want our chances to be as realistic as possible. So I'm going to say 550 would be something we would absolutely try and go to the mat for if given the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And
yep, another question, go ahead.
Or I was going to make a motion if you're ready.
Let me ask to see if there's more questions first, and then I'll come back to you. Are there any other questions either for Karen or Director McBrady? All right, seeing none. Representative Pluker.
I just realized it's my bill technically, if you're okay with that. I move ought to pass as amended.
Seconded by Representative Landry. Further discussion? And what amount did you say? I'm sorry, did you say the 750?
No, it's the 550 as Karen
Okay.
presented.
All right. 550, okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none. Cheryl, please call the roll.
Excuse me, yes, LD 219 ought to pass as amended. Senator James Dill.
Yes.
Senator James Dill, yes. Senator Russell Black.
Yes.
Senator Russell Black, yes. Senator Chloe Maxman.
Yes.
Senator Chloe Maxman, yes. Representative Maggie O'Neill.
Yes.
Representative Maggie O'Neill, yes. Representative Randall Hall.
Yes.
Representative Randall Hall, yes. Representative Thomas Schofield.
Yes.
Representative Thomas Schofield, yes. Representative Lori Osher.
Yes.
Representative Lori Osher, yes. Representative Joseph Underwood. Absent. Representative Scott Landry.
Yes.
Representative Scott Landry, yes. Representative Bill Pluker.
Yes.
Representative Bill Pluker, yes. Representative Jeffrey Gifford, absent. Representative David McCray, absent. Representative Susan Bernard.
Yes.
Representative Susan Bernard, yes. 10 yes, 3 absent.
Okay, on LD 219, I'm not going to repeat the title. It is a yes vote with the 550,000. So I will now close the work session on LD 219. And I will open the work session on LD 736, an act to enhance the ecological reserve system. Karen.
So LD 736 is a concept draft that the committee voted to carry it over. The sponsor of the bill, Representative Grahowski, had asked for more time last year. There was a lot going on at the Bureau with studies that she thought may inform what she wanted to propose for this bill, to her proposal to replace the concept draft. So she has been working with the Bureau on an amendment, and I sent that to you all a few days before the public hearing. And so I would say the testimony that you heard at the public hearing addressed her suggested amendment. So just to refresh your memories on what the amendment does, it amends the law relating to designation of ecological reserves. So you'll find this in Title 12, Section 1805. Section 1 of the amendment requires the Director of Parks and Lands to follow a process to remove the designation of a parcel as an ecological reserve. Right now, in current law, there is a process for the director to follow. Should the director want to add ecological reserves to the system, and the director can only do that in conjunction with a adoption of a management plan. And then there's a process for adoption of that management plan where there's public review and comment on the management plan. So that would be the same process for removal of a parcel from the system under this amendment. Excuse me. And then the second part of that, that first paragraph in Section 1805, at the end of the paragraph, it adds the requirement that the director submit a report to the Committee of Jurisdiction, ACF committee, when a proposed management plan includes the removal of a parcel over 10 acres from the ecological reserve system. And then the third thing that the amendment does under subsection 1, still in section 1 of the amendment, which talks about allowed uses within an ecological reserve. This adds an allowed use of gathering of materials for cultural and traditional use by a member of a federally recognized Wabanaki Indian Nation, tribe, or band in the state. And then the fourth bullet here is you'll find on page 2 of 3 of the amendment. It's subsection 4 relating to resource protection measures. It authorizes the Director of Parks and Lands to implement a predetermined wildfire tactics to protect the integrity of the landscape, and also requires the director to use minimal impact suppression tactics to the extent possible. And I believe that this was included at the request of the Bureau. So moving on to subsection 5, which starts at the bottom of page 2 and continues at the top of page 3. This is certainly the part of the amendment that generated the most discussion and questions at the public hearing. So the amendment proposes to remove the limitation on total land acreage designated as an ecological reserve. Right now, in current law, it says no more than 15% of total land acreage under the jurisdiction of the Bureau, or 100,000 acres, whichever is less. So right now, the Bureau's fee ownership is at approximately 721,529 acres. So obviously 15% is about 108,000 acres. So the 100,000 acre limit is what comes into play. And we heard that the Bureau currently manages 97,023 acres of ecological reserves. And then the second piece of that subsection 5 amendment is that it increases the amount of operable timberland acres on public lands that can be designated as ecological reserves from the current 6% to 8%. And in fact, we heard from some supporters of the sponsors amendment that they would go as high as 10%. So I know there were a lot of percentages and acres and numbers thrown around at the public hearing. Eliza Donahue from Maine Audubon did put together a memo for the committee on the ecological reserve acreage and an explanation of the caps, which was helpful. And I forwarded to you via email, and I've also put it in the electronic file. In my bill analysis, I also made kind of put together a little chart of the acres and the various percentages and what that would look like. I don't know if it's helpful at all, but having said that, currently, right now, the operable timberland acres under the Bureau's ownership is at 428,994 acres. And so we also heard that currently operable timberland designated as ecological reserve stands at 22,755. So, under current law, the cap would be based on the 428,994. The 6% of that would be 25,740 acres. That would be the cap under current law. And then I included in the chart what it would look like at 8% and 10%. There were some suggested amendments at the public hearing. One of them was a suggestion of the Bureau, and it's my understanding the sponsor supports this revision. It would be an amendment to subsection 5, which would say the designation of land as an ecological reserve may not result in a decline in the sustainable harvest level on land under the jurisdiction of the Bureau to less than the average annual harvest for the preceding 10 years. So I did reach out to Director Kutko, and I sort of said that I think for purposes, if the committee moves forward with this provision, a definition of sustainable harvest level would be helpful for purposes of this subsection. And so he did provide me language for that, for the committee's consideration, and I did paste that into my bill analysis. To be fair, there were a couple organizations that testified in opposition to the bill. I think we heard from both supporters and opponents of the bill. Obviously, the timber harvesting operations that occur on public lands are important in funding all the mission and goals and activities and projects of the Bureau. But I think opponents also feel like these timber harvesting operations play an important role in employment and economic activity throughout Maine, and particularly in rural parts of the state. And I think one of their objections was that they did not feel included in the development of the amendment, and they would have liked to have seen a more public process with multiple stakeholders at the table. And finally, I will say, I think it was Maine Forest Products Council who pointed out that in the last 25 years, over 900,000 acres of federal and private land have been placed in ecological reserves. So they feel like the urgency for the Bureau to add additional ecological reserves has been significantly reduced. So that is a segue into some of the information requests. So you got the memo from Maine Audubon. I believe it was Representative Schofield who had asked about the status of other lands that are, not under the jurisdiction of public lands that have a reserve-like status. So Director Cutco, and I sent all of this information to you, did provide a summary from the Land Acquisition Priorities Advisory Committee. It's just kind of an assessment of accomplishments and gaps in Maine land conservation. And then there's also a chart with the status of reserve-like conservation lands in Maine. The source is Maine GIS, and it's current as of January 2022. So it looks like there are approximately 950,000 acres of reserve-like conservation lands. There was also a question that Senator Maxman had posed to the professional logging contractors to sort of was interested in some data that would back up their concerns about the potentially negative impact on logging contractors and the forest products industry. So Dana Dorn from that organization kind of turned it around and said he would be interested to know, or it might be a good piece of data to know what the impact has been on timber harvesting since this law went into effect approximately 20 years ago. So you do have a chart and a corresponding graph from the Bureau of Parks and Lands Director, kind of showing you the public lands harvest data for the last 20 years. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. Are there questions for Karen? Are there questions for Director Cutco? Senator Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Cutco, for being here, and probably the chair will cut me off. I got quite a few questions and he'll probably cut me off here fairly quick, but could you just briefly, I've had a ton of information come in the last 3 or 4 days on this, and I'm really struggling to get my head all around it. I really haven't had time to study it as much as I would like to, but could you just, it's just a huge amount of information here in numbers, and it's a very important thing that we're talking about here. Could you just briefly go over again, and you probably touched on all these things, but total acreage that BPL manages, operable, non-operable, reserve, just briefly go over the figures so we can refresh our memory I've heard several times some of the emails that outside of the Bureau, there is 900,000 acres plus or minus that has been put in the last 25 years, which is not under your control. But if you could just go over those figures briefly for me, it would really help me.
Sure. Thanks, Senator Black. And before I talk about ecological reserves, I will say I was listening to the brown-tailed moth session, and will share that my spouse, who is the librarian in Bodenham, was the first, if not the only, librarian who decided it made sense to loan out tree pruners in addition to books. So she will be very supportive of that discussion. And yes, there are a lot of numbers here, and I'll talk about the numbers in just a second. I think what I do want to say, just as a preface here, is that when we first saw that the bill title came out a year ago, we wanted to be prepared for responding to what the bill language was going to be, which we just saw a few weeks ago. And so what we did is we undertook a financial analysis that was initiated by our chief of silviculture, who has since retired. Deputy Director Patterson and I reviewed it. We sent it out to a retired professor of silviculture at the University of Maine and a retired forester from forest industry to make sure that what was proposed was going to be acceptable to us. You heard testimony in the last round of a lot of folks who supported the bill, and in fact, some who supported 10%. You heard some who opposed the bill because of concerns about impacted timber harvest. And I can say right up front that we care about both of those things. We care about ecological reserves and we support the bill. At the same time, we are concerned about the impact on our bottom line. And that's actually why I suggested the language that I did about the impact on sustainable harvest level, to ensure that we can continue to harvest timber and that ecological reserve designation won't affect that. So to look at the numbers themselves, and Karen mentioned some of these, we have about 721,000 acres under the Bureau's jurisdiction. Now that includes state parks and public lands. Public lands is about 635,000 of that, and the remainder is state parks. So of the 635,000 acres of public lands, roughly 430,000 acres are what are considered operable. Operable acres refer to those acres that are forests that can be harvested. So if you take the 630,000 acres roughly of public lands, 430 of that is operable. That means the remaining 200,000 acres is cliffs, bogs, fens, mountaintops, etc., land that is what we call inoperable. And that doesn't factor into the 6 and 8% equation. And then we have 97,000 acres out of that 630,000 acres that is ecological reserve. And so we are about currently 3,000 acres under the existing cap. So we're not over the cap, we're under the cap. And the reason the bill sponsor came forward is because we're very close to the cap, and the bill sponsor is interested in increasing that cap. So we have a little bit more wiggle room. And what I can tell you is that in the financial analysis that we did, we again wanted to make sure that we were going to be comfortable with whatever came forward in terms of recommendations, so that it did not affect our sustainable harvest, so that we could continue to generate revenue. And the analysis that we did points out a couple things. It talks about the sort of break-even point and what the financial impacts would be of ecological reserve designation. I think even more importantly than that, it talks about the impact on the flexibility for us to harvest wood. We obviously have a land base like all large landowners do, where we want to have the flexibility to cut softwood when the softwood markets are good, to cut pulpwood if the pulpwood markets are to ever come back, to react to different weather conditions, et cetera. And so our concerns are, we're both the impacts on our bottom line in terms of the financial impact, and the impact on our flexibility and our ability to do good forestry. We did have some conversations before the bill language came out with the sponsor and the sponsor's representatives to make sure that where the final bill language landed was going to be acceptable to us. And based on that financial analysis that we had done, and also in light of the ecological information that you heard from many of the proponents, we felt like there is a strong ecological justification for moving forward, and the bill does so in a way that we are comfortable with what the numbers are. So I don't know if that was enough numbers for you, Senator Black, or because we have more, we could, we could go into additional numbers if we wanted to. I guess the other comment that I wanted to respond to from what Karen spoke about in terms of process, and I heard this very clearly in the testimony that raised concerns, was about public involvement in the process. And one piece that I do want to clarify for everyone is that the existing law contains language that says the director may designate ecological reserves only in conjunction with the adoption of a management plan for a particular parcel of land, and the process for adoption of that management plan must provide for public review and comment on the plan. So the existing language talks about a public process before any acres can be allocated to ecological reserve, and the amendment doesn't change that language in any substantive way. So before any ecological reserves, even if the cap is raised, there are a couple things that would have to happen. One is that the Bureau would have to make a decision as part of the management plan to recommend additional ecological reserves. And two, the public who is involved in that management plan would have to provide input that concurred with that recommendation. So that's a kind of a long-winded answer, and I know you've got more questions, but I'll take them.
Senator Dill, can I continue?
Yep, you can continue. I'll give you two more, then we'll go over to Representative O'Neill, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you. So you mentioned 430 in operable, 200,000 in non-operable. Then you mentioned that you had 97,000 acres or thereabouts in reserve. That would be out of the 430.
Yes. Or no, I'm sorry. The 97 includes roughly 35,000 acres or so that's inoperable. That's a ballpark number. I don't have the exact number there, but there is inoperable land within the ecological reserves.
So I guess so I guess a figure that I would want to know would be of the operable acres minus the reserve, what that figure would be. And another question I'd like to answer is, when was the last time you moved any land into the reserve?
There are two parts to that question. My ballpark guess for the inoperable acres that are outside of reserves is somewhere in the neighborhood of 165. And if we could give you a more firm number on that. The way that you all know the way the main landscape works, that 165,000 acres is scattered throughout our land base as, mostly small beaver bogs, meadows, bogs, fens, rock outcrops, cliffs, etc. So it's unlikely that we would designate any significant amount of inoperable lands, because that's just not the way the landscape is formed. And your second question again was, sorry, remind me.
When was the last time you moved any land into reserve, and how much?
As part of the St. John Uplands management planning process, we modified an ecological reserve by taking some land along the Allagash waterway that was adjacent to public lands, and added, I can't remember the number, I would say it was a few hundred acres off the top of my head. It's in the annual report from 2020, I believe.
Thank you.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have kind of two categories of questions. And one is, I wondered if just once again, you could go over the process that you go through to designate an ecological reserve, because you talked a little bit about the process, the management plan. And I wondered if you could talk about the role that integrated resource management plays in that designation process, and the kind of notification that the committee will get as eco reserves are being planned. And then the second bucket that I have a question about is that you talked a lot about different data, and I'm wondering if we could have Karen share screen and look at some of the documents that you've brought us, because I see quite a few in our committee materials, and it's just a different format. Usually we'd have a folder in front of us, so I think it's nicer if we can have it on the screen while we talk about it and just have you go through what you brought for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. In response to the question about process, the Public Reserve Lands has something called the Integrated Resource Policy, which includes all of our recreation, timber management, wildlife, public access, et cetera, policies. And It was created at the same time as this ecological reserve legislation was created about 20 years ago. And so we are in the process of updating that. There is a chapter in that, a couple pages on the process of designating ecological reserves. Internally, the way it works is when we do a management plan for a particular region of public lands, we form a advisory committee, usually a dozen or so folks, interested parties, and often members of the public participate in that process as well. We have a tiered system of allocations for what the dominant use of each acre will be, whether it's wildlife dominant or backcountry recreation or ecological reserve or timber dominant. And our senior planner drafts up those allocations. It's reviewed internally, then it goes out for public review. There are often a few rounds of review on those allocations. Typically, the other piece here that's going on in parallel is there is a Ecological Reserves Scientific Advisory Committee that's got about 10 folks on it. It's been in place for about 20 years, and these are people who were very involved in the original designation of ecological reserves and have a good understanding of what the gaps and needs are. One of the pieces that I forwarded to you was I talked about the financial assessment, was an ecological assessment that looks not only at the state ecological reserves, but the full 900,000 acres of reserve-like lands in the state and identifies what the gaps are in terms of habitat, whether it's floodplain forests or spruce flats or cedar swamps in different regions of the state. So the Ecological Reserves Advisory Committee gives us the science information to inform our designation, and then the management planning process is the public policy and planning arm of it. And so we wed those two pieces together and then come up with recommendations. That information is all provided to the committee in terms of the annual report. The annual report that BPL puts out. So I think I answered your question. I'd be happy to go further or happy to address any documents that Karen wants to pull up.
Thank you. Yeah, that was helpful. And the second thing that I was hoping for is just I saw a number of documents and I wondered if you could go through the things you brought us and what they illustrate.
Sure. Before we go to those documents, let's see what the couple other questions are, because that might take us a while. If that's okay.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking it might answer some of our questions and in a more methodical way. But
Representative Landry.
Thank you, Senator Dill. Good afternoon, Mr. Cutco. A couple questions. After the public review, after you go through that process, is there any need to include the legislature in that? Is there any significant change in land use?
It's not ecological reserves through the IRP are an existing land use. So I don't interpret that as a change in land use. Our planning process reallocates land from wildlife dominant to timber dominant, et cetera, on a routine basis. Every 5 years, those allocations change. So we don't consider that to be a significant change in land use.
Very good. That clears it up. And another quick question. Looking at the harvest totals, I noticed that in the past 4 or 5 years, your harvest has been going down quite a bit. Is there any particular reason for that? Is it it's not ready to harvest, or what's happening? Why are we not going ahead with more harvest?
Well, and yes, thank you, Representative Landry. I touched on this in my testimony the last time, that there are a number of factors that affect our overall harvesting. What the condition of the wood markets is, that's a significant, what are people paying you for the wood? And we'll obviously hold on to wood a little bit longer if the markets are not good, and we'll sell wood when the markets are good. We've had a very down timber market in the last few years. As you all know, the J mill explosion had something to do with that. The pandemic and pulp and paper prices plummeted. And so our harvest often reflects market forces. That's probably the most dominant thing. Certainly weather is a major factor as well. We do most of our harvesting in the winter. Fortunately, knock on wood, I can say this winter has been very good for harvesting because of the cold temperatures and the snow. But an early spring or a very wet fall affects our harvest as well. And then contractor availability, that's something we've struggled with at times. We obviously need to be able to hire contractors to harvest wood. So those are probably the three main factors that have affected our declining timber harvest over the last few years. What I can tell you, and I'm very relieved to know, is that over the last 6 months, those trends have reversed. And so what you're not seeing in the tables that I sent out is that it appears as though we've bottomed out. And our harvest rates are picking up again due to a lot of the factors I just talked about.
Very good. Thank you. And that means your inventory must be expanding if you're not harvesting it.
It is. One of the tables I sent shows both the harvest rate and what our sustainable harvest level is. And we've been pretty consistently for the last, however, since 2014, we've been pretty consistently cutting less than we're growing. And that's good because it means our inventory is increasing and it's more money in the bank account, essentially.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Senator Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Cutco, in follow-up to Representative Landry's question of change of use, significant change of use, and you said that was not a change of use. Right now, I believe the borough's policy is that everything that's going before them is requiring a 2/3 vote. I had to last week go before Legislative Council to get an extension on a existing tower in Rangeley, 19 feet added to a tower that was for EMT and emergency services. And the Bureau required a bill and is requiring a 2/3 vote on it. So if you're going to stay with the policies that you have intact right now, this bill would require a 2/3 vote. Or if not, then I guess we would want to have Attorney General's opinion on this.
I'd be happy to get an Attorney General's opinion on it, Senator Black.
Thank you.
Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill. Good morning. Good afternoon, Director Cutco. My question was similar to Senator Black's. The Bureau manages for wildlife management. It manages for other things within the within the public lands sector. It seems to me that the ecological reserves are different enough that it is a change in use. It is a substantive change in use in that while you're managing for wildlife or you're managing for recreation, you're still enabled to carry on operations, logging. The ecological reserve part would prohibit that activity. So if you look at the three-legged stool of the Bureau, recreation, wildlife, and harvesting, one of those is eliminated by being put into an ecological reserve. So I applaud the idea of getting a opinion from the AG's office as to whether or not a 2/3 vote would be required, because in my view, it is a substantive change from the way it is now. So thank you for going forward with that.
Representative Bernard.
I guess I would just respond by saying that the fact that we allow for multiple uses doesn't mean, as you know, that every use has to happen on every acre. We can have different uses on different acres. And I guess in response to the AG question, I'm happy to reach out to the AG on this. I obviously want to make sure I'm doing everything in compliance with the law. What we're talking about here is an amendment to an existing law that's been in place for 20 years. And if your concerns relate to whether ecological reserves at all are appropriate on state land, I think that's a question that goes back to when the law was passed back in 2020. Because we're not talking about giving the director any additional authority here. We're talking about changing a cap that was statutorily determined more than 20 years ago.
If I might, Senator Dill, I am not concerned about ecological reserves being on public lands. I just wanted to go on record as having said that, but I am concerned about the process. Thank you.
Fair enough.
Representative Burnett.
Thank you very much, Senator Dill. I was concerned when I heard that there really weren't a number of stakeholders from the industry, from the forestry industry, that were a part of vetting this bill. And so I wonder if you would explain for me why that didn't take place, or in my view, had those stakeholders been part of this process, it probably would have changed what this legislation looks like. So if you could just address that a bit.
Yes, thank you, Representative Bernard. I think it's a fair question. I don't know that I am the best person to respond to that question. It was not, just to clarify and remind everyone, it was not an administration bill. So we didn't feel as though it was, our responsibility or charge necessarily to do a stakeholder process or to solicit input from others. We, in fact, were responding to a bill by a legislator and had discussions with those who were sponsoring the bill. But much as any other bill comes at the department, we don't necessarily feel as though it's our responsibility to engage a stakeholder process about bills that are sponsored by legislators.
Thank you very much for that. Can I have a follow-up, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Going off a little bit in a different direction, I think I understood you to say that we're about 3,000 acres underneath the cap at this moment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So 3,000 acres doesn't seem like a lot, and maybe, and it was explained that's why this bill was brought up in the first place. Since the number is still lower, in other words, the industry has not capped that out yet, I guess I'm curious as to why we would need to look at that even more closely. The industry has stayed within the current cap, and so I don't understand why we would have to reconsider that, since they seem to be doing a pretty good job of it as it is.
Well, again, Representative Bernard, we're responding to the language that was put forth by the bill sponsor. It was not a department bill, so some of that may be redirected to the bill sponsor. I think what I can tell you is that, the original legislation was passed 20 years ago, and it's been 20 years of continuing to manage land and acquire land and understand what our monitoring is telling us. And we've learned a lot in 20 years. And we've learned a lot about the importance of ecological reserves for biodiversity conservation, for carbon, as you heard in the task force, for recreation, for all the reasons why ecological reserves are important. And given that this is the first time that this bill has been looked at in 20 years, I think it was appropriate to look at the acreage caps and chart a course for the future that allows us to very judiciously move forward with adding acres with significant constraints. And again, we can pull up the charts and sort of talk about what the numbers mean, but the 8% that is in the bill and that the administration is comfortable with would result in a total change of slightly more than 1% of the Bureau's acreage, or roughly a little less than 1% of the reserved, like 900,000 acres of reserved like land throughout the state. So I think it's a pretty small amount in the grand scheme of things, and I think there is prudent reasoning for moving forward with it.
Representative O'Neill, back to you and your charts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was hoping that we could look at the charts just to go through it together.
Which one would you like to see first, Representative?
I don't know. I think I will defer to Director Cutco on that just because he was the one who submitted them. But yeah, I'm just hoping for a little bit of an overview on the materials.
Okay, if you don't mind, Director Cutco, could I go to timber harvesting since I have that one up?
Sure.
Since I'm so good at screen sharing.
And I don't know what it's going to look like on screen. The numbers might be very small. So indeed, they are very small.
I don't know, does that not work, or do you want to go off your paper copy?
It's not even there.
It's not there?
It showed at first, but then it went away.
Oh, okay.
If you can go back, I don't know that we'll be able to read the actual numbers, but I can at least describe what the table includes.
Okay.
And then folks can refer to it on their own screens or later at some point. I guess I'll just jump in here while Karen, you're trying to pull this up. So what I provided was there was a question about the Bureau's harvest level. Great. Okay, so we'll work with this. Oh,
it's gone again.
About the Bureau's harvest level. So we provided, okay, don't touch thing. There is a table on the left and a chart on the right. The chart shows the same thing as the table. So the chart or the table shows our harvest level over the past 20 years. So 2001 to 2021, the harvest level is in bold. So you can see it ranges from a low of roughly 48,000 up to a high of 164,000. And for those who have been on the committee long enough, you'll probably recall that it was harvesting in 2014 that raised the concerns about sustainable harvest level within the department, which was when my predecessor, Doug Denico, testified, and there was a committee decision to actually put the sustainable harvest level in statute. So that's the column to the left is the sustainable harvest level in cords. That's the amount that we can harvest every year on average without depleting the timber inventory. And you can see that currently in 2021, that sustainable harvest level as calculated by the Bureau is 159,000 cords per acre. And the sustainable harvest level as determined by statute is 160,000 cords per acre. So basically the same thing. The column all the way on the left is the regulated acres. That's essentially the same thing as operable acres. There is a slight difference there in that 2021 number, 418,000 as opposed to 429,000. Because there were some recent lands that were added where we haven't done a formal inventory of operable acres yet. We've estimated that there are about 10,000 acres of operable. So that would bring that 418 to about 429. The number on the right, this is perhaps the most important number, is the harvest, the actual harvest as a percentage of the sustainable harvest level. So this is basically saying how much of what you're growing are you cutting? And you can see that it's pretty consistently less than 100%. That 2014 year, it was actually over 100%. So in that year, in that 1 year, we cut more than we were growing. But on average, looking over the past 20 years, we have cut about 79% of growth, which means that we continue to put wood on the stump. We're continuing to grow our bank account, continuing to grow our inventory. And another way to interpret that number is that if we're pretty consistently cutting less than we're growing, we interpret that to mean that there is actually some room to designate more acres as ecological reserves if it's done thoughtfully, prudently, and in a manner that doesn't significantly affect our bottom line or our flexibility to harvest. The chart on the right, the jagged line, essentially shows what the harvest level has been. You can see that peak of 161,000 or 164,000, I guess it was, in 2014. And then you can see how we've fallen off in the last couple of years because of the factors that I described, market forces, et cetera. And again, fortunately, that number, if we had the most recent last 6 months, you'd see that turning in the other direction and starting to move upward. And I think this goes to Dana Doran's question about the relationship between ecological reserve designation and harvest rates. And the bottom line is, we've thought about this a lot, and really there is no relationship between ecological reserve designation and harvest rates. And in fact, the existing statute requires that ecological reserves not impact harvest. So, the jagged ups and downs you see there are largely reflective of the market conditions, weather, contractor availability, et cetera. There's really no relationship there to ecological reserves.
Is there another chart there that you'd like pulled up, Representative O'Neill or Director Cutco?
There's just one more that I sent, and it's the title of it is Status of Reserve-like Conservation Lands in Maine. And I think this was in response to Representative Schofield's question of we've got 97,000 acres of state ecological reserves. What else is out there in terms of land that's set aside from timber harvesting? So that's what this table shows is there are 226,000 acres of federal lands that are not harvestable. The primary example of that would be Acadia National Park, or the Appalachian Trail Corridor, or a portion of Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge. So that's federal. State is all the entities and agencies below there. Very small fractional amount of municipal, and then private is groups like the AMC and others. So you can see, and Karen mentioned this number, there's roughly 950,000 acres of land that is in reserve-like status in Maine. That accounts for a little under 5% of the state. The portion that the state owns down below, you can see the various state agencies that own reserve-like land, with Baxter State Park being the largest there. That total is about 1.8% of Maine. And then to put this in the context of the acreages that we're talking about, the 8% figure would add roughly 8,500 acres to this total, which would be 8,500 acres out of 950,000 is less than 1%. I went through that pretty quickly, but I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Representative Hall. You muted, Representative.
There we go. Thank you, Senator Dill. I don't have a question for Director Cutco, so I'd defer if anyone else had something, but
I do have a question. So I just want to see if I'm grasping all this. So right now, there's a cap of 100,000 that can go into ecological reserve, and there's 97,000 that is already there. If we go up to 8%, you just said it would add another 8,500 acres or 10,000 acres. For easy math, let's call it 10,000 acres. So if we move to the 8%, are we also putting a cap on of 110,000 acres? It seems like I'm hearing that there's no cap, and I don't know what that means. If we're capping it at 8%, why aren't we capping it at 110,000 also? And I'm okay with that angle. If we're moving it up to 8 and we're going to add another 10,000 acres to it, yeah, that's okay. But I'm also hearing there's other figures out there. So can you answer that directly for me?
Sure. And I guess to clarify, the bill doesn't. The bill itself doesn't add additional acres. The bill allows the department to add additional acres. And what 8% does, it allows both the managed forest land and ecological reserves to grow as the department acquires land. So right now, under the existing ownership that we have of 630,000 acres in public lands, we could add no more than, this bill would allow us to add no more than 8,500 additional acres plus the 3,000 acre cap. However, moving forward, let's say 10 or 15 years from now, if the department has acquired 50,000 more acres of land, let's say all 50,000 acres of that were operable, we could add another 4,000 acres or 8% of 50. So it allows that ecological reserve acreage to increase as the department acquires land in proportion to the amount of managed forest that we can harvest to pay for that. Does that make sense?
No, I understand that. My concern was by removing the cap, that if you acquired another 50,000 acres, all of a sudden the department could say, we're going to put all 50,000 of this into an ecological reserve.
That's the 8% would apply to any future acres, as long as the future acres came in undesignated by the department.
Representative Landry, then I'll come back to you, Representative Hall. These are for questions for Director Cutco.
Just a bit of a clarification, Director Cutco. When you were talking about the harvest and the sustainable harvest, you mentioned a number of like 150,000 cords per acre. I don't have any acreage here that will produce quite that much. Grow there. 150,000 cords per acre.
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have misspoken. If we've got land that's got 150,000 cords per acre, I'll come to you next year with a bill to sell that, because that's going to be pretty valuable land.
We'll be looking for it.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Hall, who is your correct question for? Is it a comment or?
Well, a little bit of both. Going back to Representative Bernard's question about the 3,000 acres, and we're going to be still underneath the limit. As to, I guess the question would be to Representative Grochowski that sponsored the bill is, at this point, what is the need to change the percentage from 6 up to 8%? And is this something that we could possibly, move into a stakeholder study, and instead of trying to move ahead on it quite as fast as it seems to be rushing this through, if we could have a stakeholder study on this and bring this back at another session when we actually had some more information. That's my take on it.
Okay, I see Representative Grochowski is here. Can you answer that question, Representative?
Hi, everyone.
And good afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I'm Representative Nicole Grochowski of Ellsworth. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask for the question be repeated because I foolishly clicked the port over link as the question was starting and I missed a good portion of it. Sorry.
Okay, Representative Paul, can you repeat it?
Sure. My question is back to Representative Bernard. Basically had the question as, if we're looking at coming in at approximately 3,000 acres, which still keeps us under the 6% limit right now, my question is, why do we need to move forward and change this to up to 8% at this time? And would it be possible if maybe we could have a stakeholders study on this and bring it back, at a further down the road at another session? It just seems to me and to some of the others, I believe, on the committee that we're trying to rush this through at this time, where not all the stakeholders were included. And if we could include them in a study on this and bring it back at a later time, where we're not going above our cap at this point.
Thank you, Representative Hall, for the question and for repeating it. I appreciate that courtesy. Couple of things I'd like to say. I think there's sort of multiple questions in there. Regarding the cap, as has been stated, we are about 3,000 acres shy of that cap. I would remind committee members that There are ecological reserves in the 10 to 12,000 acre range, and our smallest one is 775 acres. So this cap is really prohibiting or making it challenging for BPL to look at what makes sense to turn into ecological reserve, because there may be current acreage that only could act as an ecological reserve if more than 3,000 acres of it is conserved, due to the way that the ecosystem functions. So I think that this cap is currently prohibiting BPL from starting that management plan process, that robust public process, notification to the committee, et cetera, of what lands it might want to conserve or to turn into ecological reserve designation, because that cap is much, much smaller than most of the ecological reserves in the state. That is why I'm here today, because the cap is real and it is affecting the program and our ability to conserve all those pieces, all those portions of ecosystems, or excuse me, types of ecosystems that this program sought to protect over 20 years ago. So that's the answer to that question. I'll just pause there and see if you have any additional clarification on that before I answer your other question about stakeholder engagement.
No, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Regarding the stakeholder engagement, one of the documents that I just want to go back in time of how we got here. One of the documents that was uploaded to the committee materials was the report from the Natural and Working Lands group of the Climate Council. As you're probably aware, the Climate Council has brought together so many stakeholders of different backgrounds and with different priorities. And one of the recommendations that was nearly unanimous, and I will detail that in a second, was, excuse me, sorry, I'm just going to go back to it in the document so I can read it to you directly, that we want to maintain support for and consider expansion of the state's ecological reserve system and update ecological reserve system legislation to reflect new science on climate change threats, mitigation opportunities, and landscape resiliency. I think part of the update that we're looking at is not just the expansion portion of that recommendation, but also the new science. I mean, we know that we need to conserve additional places in Maine, and we know that in some cases that's going to take more than a couple thousand acres to do that. Also, we've included that language about fire suppression. That's something that's changed over time and is exacerbated by climate change. So there are aspects of this bill that are reacting directly to that recommendation. And I wanted to mention again that it was a unanimous recommendation, except for Pat Strauch of Forest Products Council opposing it. And I appreciate that his position on that has been consistent through this process, you know, as he came in front of this committee as well. Whereas if you look at the membership of the Natural and Working Lands group, you would find that I believe Dana was a member of that. And so while, you know, we did not gather a stakeholder process to draft this bill, stakeholders have been aware that this bill was in process. One of the members of the Natural and Working Lands group gave an update to that group in December that this bill was being worked on. And, you know, at that time, I hope that stakeholders could have proactively engaged as well, because they were being informed that this was in process. So it's sort of a two-way street. I regret, you know, not being able to talk to everyone with an interest in this bill in every aspect of the process, but I think this committee provides an excellent opportunity for stakeholders to come together and express their concerns. And I think, you know, I trust you all as committee members to weigh what you think those are without having to, you know, send this back out to a group of people who are going to come back and present basically the same information that you've already heard, because the numbers are what they are. And the research has shown that there are a significant number of ecosystem types that are not yet conserved. So those basic facts remain true. And in our estimation, working with the department, what we've proposed in this bill is the best way to accomplish the goals of the ecological reserve system. So hopefully that answers your question. The process hasn't been perfect, but I appreciate all of your attention and ability to helping us finish the process and have stakeholder engagement in this forum here.
Representative
Could
O'Neill. Yep, go ahead. You have a follow-up? Sorry.
Well, just a follow-up comment. I agree with most everything you've said, except for one thing. I've been the fire chief in our town for 26 years, and I've been involved with the fire department for the last 45 years. And, you know, I see these parcels of land that private owners own around here that aren't managed, that they don't ever cut a tree. They just let it, you know, go natural. And these are the pieces of property that come up and cause us more hazard as far as wildfire than land that is managed. So I just think it's something that we need to stop and look at is to make sure that we can properly manage these timber harvest lands so that we can, you know, cut down on our wildfire. But that's, I know we disagree on the effect of that, but I'm good. Thank you very much.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just had that the sponsor addressed my it's much more of a comment to say that I think the stakeholder process did take place with the Natural and Working Lands Group, and just seems kind of like chasing our tail if we send it back to that same exact group of stakeholders who already weighed in and said what they wanted to do. I didn't know if the sponsor wanted to comment because I know that she has a history as a fireman, so maybe.
We could take our fire discussion elsewhere. I was more of an urban firefighter, so I wouldn't want to weigh in on the experiences of Representative Hall in a more rural area. But you know, wildfire is a natural event, and it is part of what we should study in our ecological reserves, I believe. But I think there are other biologists who are probably more able to discuss the pros and cons of wildfire and why we research the effects of it, if we really want to go down that path. But thank you, Representative O'Neill.
Representative Burnett.
Thank you very much, Senator Dill. So Representative Grochowski, while I understand that you feel that this bill has been vetted prior to, in leading up to how this bill was put together, I think that by the time it got to putting together a bill, this is my view of it, is that it was done in an ecological viewpoint or under the lens of the ecology, of ecology, as opposed to, say, the forestry industry. And you yourself said that the forestry industry did speak up and was not in favor of what was discussed earlier or had a different viewpoint. My point would be that when you put together a bill, that I think it's really important to have that stakeholder be in the room so that they're always part of the development of a bill. In other words, that it's not just through the lens of the ecology end of it, but there is indeed, a forestry part of this whole thing. And so I have to say, I don't really think it's chasing our tail to make sure that you have all the people vetting a bill. So I would have to agree with Representative Hall, and I'll put this in the form of a question because you're here to answer questions, to have some sort of a resolve that allows us to take a look at this bill through all of those lenses. That's what makes for a really well vetted bill. And so my question to you is, would you have any problem if there was a resolve where more people were involved in this discussion to make the bill as good as it can be? Because we all want the same thing, or at least I believe that we do. We all want the same thing, to make sure that our forests are managed and that we have ecological spaces and all of that. But I want to make sure that we do it fairly, that everyone is represented. And so that's my question to you.
Thank you, Representative Bernard, for the question. I agree completely with your philosophy of lawmaking in ideal circumstances. I would say that I think this committee process is an incredibly robust stakeholder process. I think there's 40 pieces of testimony available for everyone to consider. And unfortunately, the testimony submitted by the two groups, which I believe are the only pieces of testimony in opposition, didn't offer any suggestions for compromise. So, in my experience on the committee that I serve on, when people have ideas for how to come to compromise, they suggest that because it's the job of this committee, or it can be the job of the committee, to help broker that compromise. I don't believe that sending this to a stakeholder group is going to result in the outcomes you're hoping for. If you'd like to draft an amendment that you would support to do that, I welcome you to do that. But I firmly believe that we are at a point of taking action now, and that is what I'm going to request of the committee.
May I follow up?
Yes.
So Representative, is there a list or something of acreage with locations that's motivating this change? That there's a problem? Is there data on that at all?
Yeah, so one of the documents that was submitted, it was a summary. I think it was submitted by BPL. So Director Cutco might be able to discuss this as well, and I think he has some. The assessment of accomplishments and gaps in Maine land conservation. This is a 2021 draft. It found a number of gaps. It's explicitly said what types of ecosystems are not currently conserved. I think, my personal view is if I were the Bureau of Parks and Lands and I knew that I was up against a cap, I wouldn't spend a significant amount of my staff and time resources to fully vet what should go into the system until I knew from the legislature that that was a possibility. I can't speak for the director or the Bureau, but it is such a robust public process to create the management plan and get stakeholder input about creating an ecological reserve that it would be, I would be hesitant to ask them to get the cart in front of the horse in their process by coming out and saying specifically what parcels and what portions of parcels they right now want to designate as ecological reserves. So, if you want to direct that question to them, you can, but my view is it's entirely appropriate to understand what types of lands we're talking about and generically where they are in the state, but not specific acreages.
Right, and I'm sorry if I need to clarify. I didn't ask for a list of what would be changed. I'm just asking for, as you were putting this bill together, what were the areas that were problematic? That's all I meant to say, is not to have the Bureau come up with what they would do, but only the areas that you found problematic, which led to this bill.
Some of the ones that I included in my testimony that were from that report: northern hardwood forests, cedar swamps in northern Maine. We don't have any large forest blocks in southern Maine, and there are really unique ecosystems in southern Maine, especially certain types of oaks. I'm aware of that summary. I think, there's a much longer report than that we could share with you if you're really interested in digging in. I'd also add that there are some very qualified biologists who have a great understanding of the ecological reserve system, in addition to Director Cutco, who are available to ask questions of, I believe, in the waiting room, such as Dave Publicover and Alec Giffen, if you want to ask them more specifically.
Representative, would you be opposed if we amended it, like, say, keeping it at 8%, but still putting a cap on it of, say, 115,000 acres or something? That then allows the department 18,000 acres to deal with. And then I heard Director Cutco say, well, if 10 or 15 years from now, we bought or we got 50,000 more acres of land, then, you know, we could take 4,000 of that if we so desired and put it into an ecological reserve. However, I understand if we were already at the cap, they couldn't do that. But if we're talking sometime in the future, then I would expect that they could come back and have the same discussion then. But this would give them a working number right now to deal with if they have some issues. And that may be a way to compromise, as you pointed out, to move the committee forward with maybe an unanimous decision, but at least an outcome that maybe more of us could buy into.
Thank you for the question, Chairman Dill. I just wanted to make it quite clear that the change from 6 to 8% is what is absolutely the most critical. That is the limit that we are really backed up against. The reason I proposed to remove the other limits is because they're accomplishing, in my view, very little, except for creating more confusion. You know, when I thought about how to draft this bill with other interested parties, I spent a lot of time looking at the numbers you guys have all. Sorry about that. It was bound to happen once in 2 years. That's the first time she's gone off during a hearing or work session. Sorry. You know, I think that part of what I thought about was how well the Bureau manages these decisions and the public process that happens before a piece of land becomes designated as an ecological reserve. And that my trust, I guess I would say, I would call it, is in that robust system more than a cap. I think the cap of 100,000 acres, even if we increased it to 115,000 acres, is arbitrary. What's important is that the Bureau has to manage its own budget. It is not free to have land in ecological reserve because of monitoring, trail maintenance, access, et cetera. So the department has to weigh every decision about what type of management happens on land. And I think that is where we actually get the limits we're looking for, not in a number like 100,000. If the committee requires an additional cap for certainty in the program, and, you know, recognizing that another version of ACF a couple of years in the future may have to revisit that, I would request that we consider a percent cap as opposed to a fixed number, because I think a percent cap is something that makes sense in relation to how the whole system is managed, not just a number that we can come to today based on the data we have today. And I think a percent would be more future-proof than a fixed number, personally.
And I guess, Representative, that's where I'm confused. I thought the 8% basically was a cap of the total operational acres. So it does translate essentially into a fixed number. Now, I don't know, maybe that's a question for Director Cutco, but I know Representative O'Neill's had her hand up here too, and I don't want to hog the conversation, but if either one of you two can answer that, then I'll go over to her. I would appreciate that. It's just my confusion here.
I can start out, and then Director Cutco, you fill in as the actual expert. But I wanted to just make sure that people were aware that there are sort of two buckets of caps. One is on the operable acres, that's the 6% to 8%. There's also a cap on the overall system. There are two caps there. One is 100,000 acres and one is 15%. So I was suggesting, if you want to have a cap on that frame of the system, if you will, that we look at a percent cap and not a fixed number cap, because that will best approximate how the Bureau can financially manage, you know, what is in one type of management versus another.
Okay. I would go over to Director Cutco on that and say, okay, the 15% cap that I see is in there. Is that on the total 630,000 acres? So that includes the wetlands, that includes the meadows and et cetera, all of a sudden do I take that 15% and I move it over here to the 400,000 operable acres? and I say, oh, well, my cap now is 15% of whatever the operable acreage is that we have.
I think I'll try to clarify that. The 15% is actually, as the statute is currently written, it is on the land that is under the Bureau's jurisdiction. I'm sorry, let me check that. I'd have to check the statute. I'm not sure. I think it's whether it's land under the Bureau's jurisdiction or whether it's public reserve land. One of those numbers includes the state parks, and one includes just public reserve lands. But the key difference is between a fixed number and the percentage is that obviously as the Bureau continues to acquire land in the future, the percentage will allow more designation of lands into the future. If the Bureau never acquired an additional acre of land, that 8% would in fact be fixed. But as the Bureau acquires land, the 8% would allow that number to change over time. And I'll check on that.
So just answer this, and then I'll get off this. How does the 8%, if we move to 8%, relate to the 15%? That's where I'm having my problem understanding with these two percentages. I understand going forward, if we say 8% and you, as you gave us an example, you acquire 50,000 acres, then you can take 4% of that and put it into ecological reserve, or 4% someplace else. I realize another 4,000 acres someplace else. I don't believe it has to come from that 50,000 acres, because you now have 700,000 acres or whatever it would figure out to be. And so you've just added some place where you can take 4,000 acres. It doesn't have to be from that plot of land. But how does that number relate to the 15%?
Right, and I did grab the language now. So it's the 15% is the total acreage under the jurisdiction of the Bureau. So it's 15% of 721,000 acres, and that includes both the public reserve land and the state park land as well.
Okay.
As Karen said at the outset, the way the current language is written, it's 15% or 100,000 acres, whichever is less. The 15% of 720,000 acres is 108,000 acres. So the 15%, according to the current statute, is no longer in play because 100,000 acres is less. If we get rid of the 100,000 acres and we retained the 15%, it would also allow ecological reserves to grow. But essentially what it would do is it would serve as a cap on the inoperable acres that we could designate, the bogs, the fens, the mountaintops, the cliffs, etc. That's the key difference between the 15% and the 8%, is the 15% relates to overall acreage of the Bureau, and the 8% only relates to the operable acres or the wood that we could cut. The reason that the 15%, I don't want to speak for Representative Grohowski, but the reason I think the 15% was eliminated is the designation of the cliffs and bogs and fens, the inoperable stuff, doesn't have a significant impact on the Bureau's ability to harvest timber. It's really the operable forest land that is the critical part for the Bureau, and that's why the 8% was retained. So
Okay,
again,
so if we say it's 8% of the operable land,
yes,
what would that number be right now today?
it would result in the Bureau's ability to designate about 11,500 acres of operable forest land. That includes 3,000 acres that we have currently under the cap, plus another 8,500 acres that this bill would allow us to designate. And again, that amounts to a little over 1% of the Bureau's land base.
Okay, thank you. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, a couple things. I'm trying to remember them. I think the first thing I want to say is that I think I would have to process a little more about the cap, but my reaction to it is that the committee already considered a bill from Representative Jabner, I think it was last year, and we rejected it. That would, set a limit on public land. That was unanimous. I don't know that I feel like the proposed cap really adds anything. So just putting that out there. And part of it was making the math and all the little pieces less complicated, as we're seeing as we discuss it. But something I wanted to ask, there were two things. There was the 2/3 question, and I wondered if Karen had done any legwork on that she could talk to us about, because that just seems kind of like a red herring to me, but I wanted to hear a little more info on whether she'd reached out to anybody. And then the second thing I'll try to remember while she does that.
Thank you. No, I haven't looked into it. I guess as the discussion was going on now at the work session, the committee's counsel did review the sponsor's draft amendment and didn't sort of flag it at that time. That doesn't mean it's not an issue, but I guess I think the question about whether you need to table this bill or if you could go ahead with a vote. I think if you wanted to move forward with the bill, obviously it would be subject to legal review, and I would specifically say, look, this is a concern of the committee and we'd look into it further for you, and then it would have to, you'd have to amend it further to include the 2/3 preamble. So I guess that's all I'll say about that. But it hasn't been flagged yet by anyone here, but that doesn't mean, upon further review, it could require 2/3 vote, but it hasn't been kind of a red flag yet.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, just if I'm processing, that seems like normal bureau operation to decide whether an existing piece of land is designated as ecological reserve or not, but because it was about substantial reduction or selling. I don't know. I'm just processing. I'm not really seeing the legal relation, but I do want to make sure that we address our committee members' question about that. And then the second thing that I wanted to ask about was, it came up that Representative Bernard asked about specific ecosystems that the department is interested in protecting. And I'm wondering if Director Cutco can talk a little bit about, there's reference to maybe there's a report that talks about gaps in the system, and because there was question about the need for the bill. And I think that there's a lot more process behind this than we're acknowledging, I suppose. But
sure. What I can do is maybe give you a little bit more background about the one-page report, the draft that was provided to the committee. And again, the acronym was LAPAC, and it stands for Land Acquisition Priorities Advisory Committee. Back in 1997, so close to 25 years ago, there was a committee that was put together of stakeholders to determine what the priorities should be for land acquisition in the state moving forward. Wildlife, deer wintering areas, recreation, important ecological areas, public asset access, et cetera. And so when the Land for Maine's Future was funded with $40 million moving forward, and significant opportunities for additional land protection, there was an assessment undertaken to essentially look back at since 1997 to see, okay, how have we done at meeting the intents of the LAPAC committee 25 years ago? So there was a fairly detailed analysis done with geographic information systems and multiple layers of trails and wildlife habitats and habitat types and forest conditions, et cetera, to essentially figure out what have we done a really good job of protecting and what are we missing. And so it's that latter part, the gaps of what are we missing, where I think that this report is going to be really helpful. And it's not finalized yet, so I did put draft on it. But there are a number of sections to that report that talk about public access and wildlife habitat and trails, motorized, non-motorized, et cetera, to essentially guide land acquisition moving forward. And part of that was a pretty detailed assessment done by the Natural Areas Program of specific habitat types in different parts of the state and how well they were conserved and how well they weren't conserved or what's missing. And so that was I think the list or the compilation essentially that Representative Grohowski referred to, whereby for each part of the state, we essentially have a checklist of what's well protected and what's not. And not surprisingly, the sort of the key talking point there is we've done a really good job at protecting mountaintops. The Appalachian Trail, the Bigelow Range, the Katahdin Range, et cetera. High recreational value, high ecological value. Most of those areas are protected. We've done a really nice job at protecting coastal tidal marshes and bogs and fens. But there are certain forest types that aren't as well conserved. And so that checklist includes those different forest and habitat types in different parts of the state. Now, to Representative Grohowski's point about how specific have we gotten in terms of identifying parcels of land, we do have some preliminary thoughts on that, but it really relates to the 5-year management planning process. And obviously lands change and science changes. And so we don't really think specifically about changes or modifications to ecological reserves until the time for that 5-year plan has arrived so that we can make use of that information. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I think my last question is, if this has been a part of the Bureau's work for so long, and we're not at that cap now, are we at risk of, is it a realistic conversation to say that all this land overnight is going to go into ecological reserve? Can we afford to do that? I'm just trying to get the practical sense of, while it may be goals, what's the fear about? Is that practical?
Well, I guess again, to reflect on the 5-year management planning process, because the current legislation and the amendment doesn't change it, talks about making changes in consultation with a 5-year management planning process. It's not like if the bill passed in May of this year, I would get out my pen and immediately designate 11,000 acres of ecological reserves, because we have to wait until those areas come up where ecological reserves would make sense. And that might be next year, it might be 5 years from now, but it's not going to be in June of this year. And then we'd also, as I mentioned, want to have a robust conversation with the Scientific Advisory Committee to determine if those were the right places. And then the public management planning process would weigh in, and the public would have an opportunity to weigh in as well. So no, to answer your question, the changes would be incremental and deliberate and thoughtful, and not immediate.
Thank you.
Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill. I'm just wondering, Director Cutco, as the Bureau is stewards of this property, can you explain to me why perhaps the Bureau wasn't more proactive in seeing this need and submitting a bill from the department to, if this impending need is there, and I'm not questioning that. I'm just wondering why the Bureau didn't sponsor this on its own. Basically, that's my question. Thank you, sir.
It's been under discussion, Representative Schofield, and we just within the last year and a half or so have hired a new deputy director, Bill Patterson, who's in charge of public lands. We've had pretty significant turnover in staff. I think it's safe to say the last director who sat in my seat was probably not a big supporter of ecological reserves, and so it's been under discussion. And I'm not going to sit here and say we would have come forward had the representative not proposed the bill, but she did propose it over a year ago, and so we were aware that it was out there. And then they approached us to again find out what might be reasonable. And quite honestly, the conversation I think started with removing the caps entirely. And that was not something that was going to be acceptable to the administration. And so we arrived at a place that we felt like made sense.
Thank you for that response. Appreciate it.
There are other questions for Representative Grochowski or Director Cutco? Well, we have a couple options, and I'm at the point where I really don't want to vote on this today personally, because I'd have to vote out not to pass, and I don't want to do that. I'd like to hear what the AG has to say, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around, sorry. I used to think I was fairly good in math, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around the 15% versus the 6% and the 600,000 acres versus the 400,000 acres. And I really need to process that a little bit more before I could vote in favor of this. So my preference would be, and I know Representative Schofield, you hate this, but my preference would be to table this for 1 week and let us all kind of think about it and process what we heard today and come back and vote next time, say in a week. That would be my druthers, but if somebody wants to make a motion, we can vote on it. If it's not, table. Representative Hall.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Dill. I'm in total agreement with you. I'd like to see us table this for a week, and I guess I would make a motion that we would table it until we could put it on the docket again.
Okay, thank you. Senator Maxman?
Can you, I'm okay with that. I think I just really wanted to recognize the work that Representative Grochowski has put into this bill and the enormous depth of knowledge that she has. And I've read everything that she sent over, and it doesn't leave me with many doubts about this bill. And I just would really encourage folks to dig into all the materials that she has mentioned today, because they really are extremely thorough. And I think it's a gift to us as committee members to have that presentation so easily accessible to us.
Thank you, Senator. Are we waiting on a second here, Representative O'Neill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think we got to be fair when we talk about preparation and process, because very few sponsors come as prepared as the sponsor always does. So I just want to say that really clearly. And I do second the motion to table.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. So it has been seconded. Go ahead, Cheryl, and do the roll call, because I'm not sure everybody's going to go with tabling, but I think they are. So if you want to call the roll.
Sure. LD 736 to be tabled. Senator James Dill.
Yes.
Senator James Dill, yes. Senator Russell Black.
He's
Senator
absent.
Russell Black, absent. Senator Chloe Maxman.
Yes.
Senator Chloe Maxman, yes. Representative Margaret O'Neill.
Yes.
Representative Margaret O'Neill, yes. Representative Randy Hall.
Yes.
Representative Randy Hall, yes. Representative Thomas Schofield.
Reluctantly, yes.
Representative Thomas Schofield, yes. Representative Lori Osher.
Yes.
Representative Lori Osher, yes. Representative Joseph Underwood, absent. Representative Scott Landry.
Yes.
Representative Scott Landry, yes. Representative Bill Pluker.
Yes.
Representative Bill Pluker, yes. Representative Jeffrey Gifford, absent. Representative David McCray.
Yes.
Representative David McCray, yes. Representative Susan Bernard, absent. 9 yes, tabled, and 4 absent.
All right. This is tabled, and I would ask Karen to try to look at the schedule and get this on next week if we can. And so I don't want to belabor this, but give us all a little time to look over Representative Grochowski's information more and go from there. Anything else? I'll close. Yeah, I'll close the work session. Yes, Cheryl.
Yes, Representative McCray is here to vote on 219 and 1921. Is that okay?
Okay with me. Is that okay, Representative O'Neill?
No. Oh, okay, sorry. I thought you.
Yes, she's giving a thumbs up. She said yes,
Okay,
both
I'm
of them.
sorry. Sorry. So Representative McCray, on LD 1921, the committee voted unanimously ought to pass. What is
And
your vote?
I also vote yes.
Representative David McCray, yes. And on LD 219, the committee voted unanimously to ought to pass as amended.
I also vote ought to pass as amended.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Dill.
All right. Cheryl, what do you have? That was it?
That was it for me.
Aaron, do you have anything?
Not for the full committee, but just to remind chairs and leads that we'd like to have a little quick planning meeting to discuss the upcoming schedule for ACF.
And the operative word is quick. Motion to adjourn. Is there a motion? Been moved and seconded by Representatives Landry and McCray. All in favor? None opposed. Thank you all.
So Sharon.